Austin. This one.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it seems like a really nice hotel.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Class. Welcome to we are part of the IEEE Tech for Humanity series, and I'm told that I'm John Cohn from IBM. But I just want to do a shout out to my colleagues at the IEEE who are sponsoring this. How many of you know what the IEEE is? How many of you call it IE? Texas, I think I should also come out. I'm a Texan. How many people are real Texans here? Oh my God. All right, well, I'll switch to Texan. So, but I'm very, very pleased to be here talking on behalf of IEEE. It is the world's largest and I would say coolest technical community. Over 420, that's an important number, over 420,000 nerds coming together to do good in the world. How many of you use Wi-Fi? How many of you use Bluetooth? Thank the IEEE. Those are 802.15.4 and 802.11.6 and 802.16. Those are the wonderful people who brought you those funny numbers that allow you to tweet while we're talking. And I do want to ask you, I've been told by my betters that we are encouraging you to tweet, and I'll give you the hashtag in a second. But let me start by introducing myself a little bit, and shout out if you got any questions or anything like that. I just need to kind of start with a kind of coming out statement. I'm a nerd. Any other nerds here? I mean, we got nerds? Oh, man. Nerd X? So, I mean, I'm a serious nerd, and I'm sure that you are as well. I grew up in Houston, right at the heart of the space program. Oh, I just even remember, I was looking around and I accidentally even found a punch card. Anybody know what those are? Yeah, I learned about those, seriously. And vacuum tubes and stuff, but I grew up in Houston, and like every white-blooded American at the time, you know, I said I wanted to be an astronaut, and I was told very early on I was not good enough looking, so I became an electrical engineer. My mother, who just moved out of Houston, she found a letter that I had written when I was an 8-year-old that said I wanted to be an engineer and I wanted to go to MIT, and I was like, how did I know what that was? But I did grow up to some extent. I did go on to go to MIT, and I did become an engineer, did become a nerd, and I went to the nerdiest school, and, you know, MIT, any MIT people? Oh, jeez. Okay. How
about Columbia?
Well, that's going to be important. We're going to come back to it. But in terms of being a nerd, I got to introduce you to a couple of other people, because I have been, and this I don't think happens very much anymore, but I have been in my same job for International Business Machines, IBM. Any IBM people? I know that there's a couple. I've been in the same job. As a matter of fact, it's the only paid job I've ever had for almost 38 years. And I don't know if I'm a fossil or a pioneer, but this is really interesting. But I want to introduce you. So this has been, my specialty is chip making, and I'll tell you about that. Because what we're here to talk about is play. And trust me, I'll make the connection. But I want to introduce you to some other people. This is my late father-in-law, Gabe Mariano. He also worked at IBM, was snatched out of high school and sent to IBM college. He used to go, they taught him how to become, he was an amazing machinist. He loved making things, which is a big theme about play. But he used to tell me that they would take him out into the Endicott, New York parking lot and make him do like jumping jacks while the CEO of the company sang songs. He was great. Aside from using English measure and I use metric measure, we agreed on all things. He loved making things like these giant, he used to make these giant machines for making chip, you know, for putting chips on packages. He'd come up to Vermont actually and buy these big pieces of granite. He was always making things until the day he died. But the thing he made, which is really cool, after his 36 years of IBM, he made my wife. And my wife, my lovely hippie wife, Diane, IBM issued. Second day on the job, I knew that she was going to be my good partner. 8 years at IBM. Between us, 81 years in the same industry. And that's given me a pretty good perspective on stuff, especially if you're choosing your career. Find one where they will issue you a spouse. I think this is considered. But 2011, and this is not an advertisement for my employer, but I do like my employer. But 2011, my company turned 100 years old, and it was a big deal. And I am certainly the oldest and probably funniest looking person in the state of Vermont for IBM. And so I always got the chance to talk to our senators and our governors and stuff. Do you know Bernie Sanders?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, Austin. He's like the Beto of my generation. But I had to go in front of the governor and in front of our senators and talk about what had happened in 100 years of IBM. So I started thinking about that because I had this perspective of, my personal 4 decades and my life, almost 8 decades of this company. And I started trying to figure it out. It was a big deal because I had to go out in front of the public. The Burlington Free Press, which is like the New York Times of northwestern Vermont, they ran a thing about 100 years. So it had a picture of me looking kind of grizzled with a big chip, and it goes, 100 years. And Vermont's the kind of place where you run into the governor. I ran into the governor at a function, and he goes, John, I didn't even think you were 80. I forget it. But what I started to do is I was trying to think about, well, what is a perspective on 100 years? You're probably wondering, what does this have to do with play? I'll tell you. So what I did is I actually looked at, so my big thing is I love making chips. Any chip nerd type people in here? Okay, gotta do that, man. Okay. And women, that's great. So I really like the way computation started. Like my company started by making mechanical things. The first thing we made is like cheese graters and meat slicers and sausage makers, and it kind of still feels like that. But they did computation. They said, how much computation could you do with a certain amount so let's say you had a certain amount of money in the currency. You could figure out how much computation you could do. Well, over time, it went to things that were electrically powered, electrical mechanical, like the Mach 5 computer around the Second World War. It could do 52 10-digit computations a second. It was amazing. But it had a big motor, and you had to put cotton in your ears if you were walking in there. And then they went to vacuum tubes. That's what I learned on. And then to discrete transistors. They were making, we were, when I first joined the IBM company, we were making computers out of what were called discrete bipolar transistors. And they were going great. They just kept getting faster and faster. This is how much compute you could do for the same money. But then they started melting and catching fire. And we were told that was not a good feature. And I thought maybe marketing could handle that, but it didn't work. Then we switched to bipolars, to CMOS circuits. The whole thing kind of went like this. And what you might call Moore's Law, y'all heard of Moore's Law? Oh, I said y'all. Moore's Law, kind of about it here, but it's actually a 100-year kind of thing. Now, that looks pretty good. What does that have to do with play? I'll tell you what it has to do with play in a second. It's not smooth. It's all these kind of smooth parts separated by these moments where something stops working. And it's really something. I remember right here, like I said, we were starting to build computers super fast, super sexy, but catching fire. And we had to jump at that point onto something that was actually slower. And these gaps, so there's this continuous innovation and then these disruptions that have actually marked it. And the companies that couldn't make one of those jumps disappeared. There were companies like Honeywell and Nixdorf and Bull and companies like that, and Andal made lots of computers near here, and they couldn't make those leaps. The companies that actually could figure out how to make those leaps, they survived, they went on. But the funny thing is that there were new companies that kind of took over after these things because people were consuming computers. There's companies, I think you probably like, I think they're Gobble and Amazon, that come out of nowhere, and all of a sudden they're in the computer business. Well, what I found, I was thinking about this, is that how companies, handle these kind of disruptions has a lot to do with how we handle those disruptions. And it really comes down to the the past doesn't predict the future. You can't just keep doing what you were doing. There's a magic moment that you have to jump. I've gotten some illustrations from some other parts. Do any of you read The Economist? Really? I always get like halfway through and then it ends up in the tub. But they did a thing. They were looking at the same sort of power laws, like, you know, people who are kind of pushing on a theme too long. They were trying to figure out, was there something strange, you know, something going on there. And they chose to take this was invented by a guy named Gillette. This is a device, I don't know if you can tell it, but it was designed to take the hair off your face, which to me is just ridiculous. But that worked. It was about the same period, 100 years, right? It was the same period, and that worked until about 1998. And then one of their competitors said, well, if one is good, we're going to go to two. And I don't know if you remember this, but that kicked off a race where then there was the Mach 3. And I actually have searched the world over to find these things. 3 blades. Better, of course. And then there was the Quattro. And then, amazingly, there was the Fusion. And I thought, no way. Well, I found this in the Helsinki airport, you know, like convenience store. And you know what? It really does make me smooth. Or at least this part. So the Economist was kind of wondering, look, at what point does that not work? And they figured that was about 14. So clearly, you have to kind of jump off this. So what does it have to do with play? You're probably wondering. The people who asked me to give this talk are probably wondering. Well, let me explain. So here, remember this sort of how much compute could you get in those disruptions? Well, I would say that if you just change the access, so rather than how much computing you can get for $1,000, it's how much fun you have, how much money you have, how much responsibility you have in your job, 1 over the amount of hair you have, whatever. If you know, your life is going to have that kind of curve, and my life certainly has. You know, where should I go to school? Should I buy a haunted schoolhouse in Vermont, which I still live in, which anybody who really likes old buildings is welcome to buy from me. I didn't have to worry, you know, big decisions like, should I get married? You know, IBM issued me a wife, took that out. IBM had very little to do with my 3 young children, at least as far as I know, but where should I go to grad school? Should I get a tattoo of my company in a place I can't show you? Laugh. But I will tell you about some of the other disruptions. Now, this is where I was trying to figure out, what is it? You know, your life is going to have something like that too. You know, all of those decisions. You don't have to be a nerd. You could probably, if you stop and think, things that you knew were coming, you know, like where should I go to college, and things you didn't know you were coming. Oh, I lost my job, or, you know, I won the lottery. These kind of decisions, these disruptions, it's the same sort of thing. You can't just keep doing what you're doing. And this was kind of a weird opportunity for me to think about this. And the opportunity came in a very strange way. So I have 3 boys, and a little bit more about them later. But my youngest was graduating from high school. And the scariest thing, every parent's nightmare. I got asked to talk at his graduation. Now, if I suck here, you'll go on. There's 400 other sessions you're going to go to. You're not even going to remember this. I don't have to worry about it. But if you suck in front of your kid's graduation, it is, you know, written down in the annals of the history. And I live in a town. There are more people in this hotel than in the town. I'm not kidding. 2,000 people, something like that. So I was trying to figure out, God, you must remember that. When you were graduating college, was there some older man or older woman up there, guy, and you were sitting on a really uncomfortable chair? I tested these chairs last night, so I know they're comfy, but you were sitting on a wooden bench, and somebody up there was going, when I was your age. And I was that old dude now, and I was like, what am I going to say? And I was trying to reflect, actually, on this. Well, I've had a very, positive, for the most part, very positive. I love what I do. I was trying to figure out what could I impart, or what could I have said to myself as a 18-year-old bored kid. And it came to me in a very, very strange way. It actually came when I was sleeping, and my wife punched me, and she gave me this theme, and it's very central to me. And the secret that I have of how you get through those disruptions has to do very much with play. Play, think about it. And it was a really interesting thing, because what do I mean by play? I do not mean work-life balance. I hear that as a good thing. I've never really tried it, but it's supposed to, you know, it is not that you have a foosball table there, or you have a, you know, a party night out and you go bowling. That's really good. But it's about keeping a playful attitude around life. And it's something that is actually harder than you think. And what I mean by play is it means getting yourself into that zone. Sometimes people call it the zone, where you're experimenting. You're not worried about the outcome. You're not worried about what other people think. You're willing to steal ideas. You're willing to make mistakes and then laugh about them. But you're actually doing stuff that you're not supposed to do. And that is very, very key. You know, it's not what you know, it's goofing off. And I found that in my life, that it really had to do with spending time doing that, you know, the stuff that I wasn't supposed to be doing, goofing around, that everything came out all right. It took care of the worries, etc. Now, it was a very funny thing, because I had to give this talk on play, and I was, ironically, nervous as hell. And my son, my youngest son, Gabriel, there's this bridge. It's about 45 feet down, or, you know, 15 meters down to about 15 feet of water. And it is totally illegal to jump off that bridge. But it turns out that it is totally legal to fall off that bridge. And so he saw me all stuck up in my head, worrying about play, because I had this message. And he took me there and dared me to go off, to fall off of it. And it was a really funny thing, because I am a scared person. But I have, since this day, I have fallen off that bridge more times. And it really was kind of like what's the worst that can happen? I could die. No, but it was really jumping down. My talk thread didn't come to me clearly in a flash. It was more like, just don't die. But it was really a clarifying moment for me. Now, why play? You know, if you look at a kid playing, you know, they're not worried about what's, who's watching. They're exploring, they're making mistakes, and they're trying stuff, they're sharing, they're learning, they're doing silly things. And now, flash forward, as I'm working in AI, that's what we're trying to teach computers to do. Now, this sounds like a kind of obvious thing, but it turns out, why am I making a big deal about this? Because what happens is that work has this way of just canceling out. By the way, I was worried about talking to you a couple of weeks ago, and I get the New Yorker. Anyone get the New Yorker? I say I get it sometimes. Sometimes somebody has to explain it to me. This cartoon was in there as I was worried about giving this talk. And it was great. Play-Doh, the guy on the left is, coloring outside the lines. But what happens? I mean, I think that since you are personally taking time out of your life to come to South by Southwest, you probably get this message. But I give a lot of talks to nerds. You know, we're somewhere on the, on the spectrum. It does feel sometimes like life, really squeezes out the player. And there are real reasons that happens, right? No matter what kind of personality you have, you could be a really extrovert or introvert, it just tends to just gather up. And we end up doing, the work dough thing. Well, I started asking, sure, my story is my story, but I started asking people, and I'm an IBM Fellow, and I should also add, I'm an IEEE Fellow. I'm a big fan of IEEE. We'll talk a little bit, our host here today. I went and asked a bunch of my peers, IBM Fellows, IEEE Fellows, I asked lawyers, I asked, construction people, and a theme, of course I was looking for this theme, is that people who kept a playful aspect of their work, not that they had a lot of extra hobbies, but they kept learning, kept experimenting, had a good mix of successes and failures, they ended up doing better. And it's not just that they ended up doing better, as I'll explain, they were more successful on many other ways. I mean, in my own life, when I actually look at it, I am very, very pleased. I actually was almost an accidental Austonian, because back in the mid-90s, I don't know if you know this, but this was ground zero for the video games. Anybody use, probably, maybe your parents' generation of video games, PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, Nintendo Wii, anybody have those? I touched every transistor in every one of those things, along with, 500 of my colleagues. But when I actually look back on those times, those were really, really amazing things. And what were we doing? We were doing technology that was all about play. I mean, it was some of the hardest times. We used to goof around a lot because, like I remember with the Xbox 360. I think I can show these pictures. Don't record these. Oh, go ahead. I mean, it's a long time ago. But I remember, having a serious discussion about whether we could delay Christmas 2 weeks, But it was so much fun. We had a league board of who had gotten the least amount of sleep, to try to compete on that. I remember we would start answering questions from our designers. I worked on the software for chip design. We'd start answering them in fake accents, just for fun. And I did my worst fake Indian accent, and it was one of my colleagues who was really Indian, and I was like, what do I do? So I kept the accent through the whole conversation. I'm sure he knew what I was doing, but I just couldn't break it. But all of these things were really pretty interesting, because then I'd go home and my young kids would go, Daddy works on video games. And I was like, oh, that was pretty cool. And it was not just video games, including some big processors like the Power 7 chip that was in the Watson, the Watson Jeopardy. Oh, Alex, you're back. Yeah. Moment of silence. Well, not silence. Just wishing good luck. But all of this stuff, when I go back and I look at my peers, like I had dinner with one of them last time, those were the times we were most productive. If I look at the number of patents I had, those were the times I was having the most fun. I was inventing the most stuff, even though I was getting the least amount of sleep. And it was a really interesting thing, because play was driving that innovation, and innovation was driving play. What's an interesting future, kind of a forward-looking thing, is that the work we were doing, like, on things like PlayStation 3, in terms of, graphics accelerators. Do you know what a GPU is, a graphic processing unit? Anybody AI geek? So what's funny is this technology drove the creation of the electronics technology that we use. Does anyone have a cell phone? Does any loser not have a cell phone? I mean, really, all of those fun things that we have to be able to play Angry Birds or Fortnite or whatever it is you're into right now came from play. That drove the technology. It drove the cost of silicon down. It drove connectivity crazy. It drove memory prices down. And it's now driving, these accelerations are actually driving what's in AI. Think about it. Play. Play did that, which I think is very, very cool. Now, I want to talk about, I'm going to kind of shift gears a little bit. One thing about, this whole idea of disruption, life is good. No matter how good or bad things are, new stuff happens all the time. And that's why you can't predict the future. You can't worry completely about the future, because sometimes the future is going to hit you side of the head. Now, I'm about to change gears in the kind of tone of the talk, but one thing I do really like about my particular situation in my company, it's almost as big as IEEE. We're about 360,000 people. And I get to interact with people. My company has things like economists. We have an ethnomusicologist. There's actually a corporate comedian. But we have, Nobel Prize-winning physicists. And this wasn't the Nobel Prize-winning physicist, but I was using his tools. In my travels, I had gone to our Almaden Research Lab. I'm in IBM Research now. And there was a really interesting story. Back in 1998, somebody, a guy in Zurich, had actually gotten a Nobel Prize for being able to not only image atoms for the first time. 1998 was the first time anybody had sort of directly been able to see an atom and then manipulate it. So this is the world's first and smallest atomic advertisement. 18 xenon atoms on a piece of copper at about 4 degrees above absolute zero. Well, I sought this guy out. I sought his partner out. The guy who won the Nobel Prize has got all that money, and of course he's out having fun. But this guy, my friend Dr. Eigler, I showed up with 2 six-packs to go play with this machine. And again, play. Whenever you make a piece of new technology, play isn't far behind. He and his team were making these cool little new movies. Actually, the real story is, whenever anybody creates a new technology, what do? They start playing with it. They write naughty words, right? So this is the second kind of cool thing that we did. So this is A Boy and His Atom. This is the world's smallest movie, and it was all done with carbon monoxide molecules on a piece of copper. It was, you know, it's kind of stop motion. You know, do you remember Gumby, or I'm sure, yeah, that kind of stuff. Well, I was there for a different reason. I'm going to very much shift tone, and I beg that you hang on with me. Remember I told you I had 3 boys that were all, again, IBM non-issue boys. There's my youngest, Gabe, was the guy jumping off the bridge. He's in grad school now. Max, my oldest, who's 30, is now living the artistic maker life in Santa Fe. And our middle son, Sam, amazing musician, amazing athlete, really great guy. I was there to use that machine to write what is basically the world's smallest memorial. My son, Sam, in 2006, was visiting friends down in Florida. Stepped off a curb, and a car swerved to avoid his friend and hit Sam. And his soul left his body just then. He was a strong kid. And we got that phone call, had to go down to Tampa, you know, because he was down far away. And we had to make the easiest hard decision we ever made, which is to do organ donation. And so if I could just take 1 second, and I don't know what your personal belief on organ donation is, but the main thing is that we knew what Sam would have wanted. His organs went on to save 4 other people. And we ended up meeting one of them. We went to the wedding of one of them, which was a very powerful, but that's a whole other story. But if you could honor my son's memory by having a conversation with your loved ones about what you would want. And there's no shame in saying, you know, my religion doesn't allow it, but just the fact that your family knows what you would want. So, why does play have anything to do with this? Because it was the hardest imaginable time. And I don't have to, you know, explain it to you, but I was there because I wanted to write my son's name in 18 carbon monoxide, 33 carbon monoxide molecules on a piece of carbon which was now only 2 degrees above absolute zero. And 2 6-packs of beer, 2 guys. It was fun. I was laughing through tears, but that is the world's smallest memorial ever made. We didn't make a big deal about it because it's not that. But this was, you know, an unpredicted thing in my roadmap. I wasn't supposed to be that guy. My family wasn't supposed to happen like that. And it really became something interesting. And this play theme, and the reason it resonates so strongly with me, is you would think that the word play has very little to do with that kind of a tragedy. But it had everything to do for me. And it was a life-changing experience. I mean, obviously it was life-changing, but in terms of, you know, I've had I'd say it's an honor for the last 13 years to meet families who've gone through those kind of things. And, you know, there are people who obviously completely understand, just get stuck, because it's a hard thing to go through. But I have been so impressed with how many other people who are going through such a terrible thing find some sort of playful aspect to remember their loved one. It's amazing. Somebody should write a book about it, and maybe someday I will. In our case, what we started doing is we started making these stones. They're called sandstones. First, we live on a river, like you do, most of you here, and we sandblasted Sam's name in them. People wanted them. They were just a pain in the, you know, but they were hard to make. And we were like, we need to get more. So we have a friend who's a potter, and we started making these things out of clay and firing. And I mean, at this point, I don't know, we have 200,000 of them out there, and all they're doing, you know, if you go to sandstones.org, you can read about it. We talk about sand, we talk about organ donation, but mostly it turned out because everybody wanted them, and this was again 13 years ago, right? I taught myself PHP. Anybody use PHP? There's very little playful about PHP. But I will tell you that I made this website, and you know, the goal is not to track every single one of them, though I do have some with RFIDs in them. If you're interested, you can get them on videos. But we started getting these stories from people all over the place, and it's so interesting. People would send us pictures. I have one in my bag actually that's gone up into space and was fished out of the Atlantic Ocean. We have people who send them, they make them out of chocolate, they make them out of, you know, concrete. I've had people send me really inappropriate pictures with it. I'm like, what's that about? But still, people get it. And it's a really good way of keeping our son's memory, going through it and talking about something that's important. But it's really crazy. I mean, I don't really have a whole lot of time, but down here is something called St. George's Island. It's where Shackleton died. Do you know the whole story of Shackleton going through the ice, staying on the reef? Well, it turns out, a friend of mine, just 3 years ago, I saw him at work and he goes, oh man, I wish I had one of those stones. We were someplace you would never get one of those stones. I said, where is it? St. George's Island. I said, well, funny thing is, so they've been everywhere. I told the story of some friends of ours who would carry another friend's ashes down there, and they placed a stone. He said, where is it? I said, it's on Shackleton's grave, as he went back there. The guy ran up, this was at IBM, got his camera, and he had accidentally taken a picture of this. Or just 2 weeks ago, actually, a friend of mine who's on his way to Antarctica had left one of these stones in Isabel Perron's grave in La Recoleta. Another friend of mine, totally in a different, totally different thing, found it. Who knew? But it's really very interesting how play, even when it's absolutely the hardest, is the thing that got us through. Now, what's really interesting is that I found my way, and this is where I'm going to get back into IEEE, was through creating. I found that this whole thing was about creating something. And while I've always been into making stuff, I never did it with a purpose. I never did it, I was like, what am I trying to say? Well, I found out that trying to play with other people to find a tribe was the thing that made me feel the best. So for example, we didn't have any MIT alums, but I'm a rabid MIT alum. And I helped create an organization called Vomit, Vermont's own MIT club. And it's a bunch of smart people living kind of the hippie lifestyle in Vermont. And I had a group, a nonprofit group, come and ask me, hey, could you build us something that would scare children, to get them to wet their pants? And I thought, that is a good use of an MIT education. As a matter of fact, Colin, did you work on this?
I did not.
Oh, well, there's not too late, because we're rebuilding it. But they asked us to build something that scared kids, and what we ended up doing is building a 3-meter tall, 7 meter tall, 21-foot tall thing that jumped up and articulated its arms around, and was wirelessly controlled, and would scare the you-know-what out of kids. It was a fabulous engineering expedition. But I'll tell you a little bit about why am I telling you this. But all of a sudden I realized, because I was working with a bunch of people, that it was very, very healing. Likewise, did you work on this? A friend of mine from back home. This was also 7-meter tall thing for carrying hippies across the desert, half-naked hippies. Any Burning Man people? That's also a very good example of engineering. This was Sunrise, and we were basically I helped build this gigantic device, but it was with a huge posse of people that we actually built this kind of giant thing, had wirelessly controlled lights, and that matters in a second. There it is right there. Now, why am I talking about play? Well, it's fun to make stuff. But what I found is that play really helped me find my tribe. I mean, when I'm thinking about, making the vomit thing, we have, we should call it that, the pumpkin guy. We had this huge group of students and young IBMers who were working. When we were working on the Burning Man thing, we had gigantic, we were, borrowing whatever resource we can. Somewhere in here is Ben and Jerry. Ben's back there, who is the people who got me into it. We made Colin made this. We made 2 generations for Mike Gordon of Fish. Do you know Fish? What is your musical taste?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, got one Fish head. But basically, an instrument, that guy is one of the leaders of it, to basically allow crowds to participate in one of their offshoot bands. Again, borrowing people, all coming together. And more recently stuff, we do a bunch of fire. What I found is when you make stuff, people come around and it forms your tribe. And what's interesting about the IEEE, the people who are sponsoring this, is they have become my tribe. The first time I ever gave a non-technical talk was at something called ISCC. It was 6,000 people in a room like this. I was giving a talk on STEM education. It was about 10 years ago. I was so scared. I could put the mic on, I could hear my own heart up on that. But, they let me use a Tesla coil. But then I went to another talk and I started getting as you can tell, it was a little bit faded. I remember, I started going to IEEE student councils, student things all over the world, and I was just like the token. I was like somewhere between Yoda and Santa Claus. It was great. I remember ITC, the International IEEE ITC. It was here in Austin, and most of what I remember about the night is that my car got towed, but I don't want to go into the whole story about that. Oh, I had an illegal firearm that I made on stage. What I found is that the IEEE, getting a group of like-minded people and misbehaving jointly is a fabulous way to play. So finding your tribe, whatever it is that you do, figuring out how you can actually play with them, that would be my recommendation. What was funny though, is that it was play, right? I was making these crazy things with other people. Now, I'm not a particularly great maker. I'm not up here to tell you I'm the world's best. But what I am telling you is that getting that network is really cool. Now, the next talk is about IoT and AI. Well, IoT is a big thing. I've always been making things, and I didn't even know how to spell IoT. Are you guys going to stay around for the next talk because it's about IoT and AI in society? Well, like I said, IoT was new to me. My company was getting into the business, and they said, well, I really wanted to do something new because chip making, and I've been doing that for my first 30 years. I needed something new to do. And I went to the people, and I'm very senior in IBM, and I couldn't say, hey, do you have a job for me? It had to be big. And they said, well, what do you know about IoT? Well, I showed them the pumpkin guy, and I showed them the weird carousel and stuff. And they said, you're hired. Not only that, but you're running it. And so for the last 3 years, I've actually been the chief scientist in our beautiful IoT center. Oops, sorry. In, whatever. But in our IoT center here in Munich. And it's there where I learned about Internet of Things, and that's why I would really recommend you go to the next speakers too, or the next panel, because IoT is a really interesting thing. It's about connecting objects up to infinite computing. And it is a really, really interesting kind of way of working in the world. But it was my play that got me that job. And it's not just me. There's a lot of research out there. It was really interesting as I was thinking about this talk. I was doing it, thanks to Lee, who's here. I did a lot of background research, and I found out that there was a great study in Jamaica, for example. They went back in the 1970s. They actually did an experiment because they were worried about Jamaican families not getting, the families were under such financial stress, they weren't playing with their kids. So in the mid-70s, they actually initiated these learning methods that actually got parents and kids to play together. 20, 30 years later, they checked off, they followed this cohort of kids that had that thing, the kids that played, the only difference, they were 25% more successful in their work. So it's a really interesting thing because your play can be your portfolio. And that's a really big deal. And what's interesting is that play has taken me all around. I've been 80 countries for my work. And it's not because I'm a particularly good engineer. Most of it is because I'm funny looking, honestly. But it's because I really enjoy what I do. And people like to enjoy what they do. So it was interesting. While I was over there, though, I fell in love with something new. I fell in love with AI. Any AI folks? Yeah. It's amazing. I have been talking about AI for a long time. I went to MIT. Have I said that yet? But Marvin Minsky, if you know who he is, his son was my college roommate, suite mate. I love what, AI has been about to happen it was started in 1956. Yeah. There was a conference in 1956 where actually I'm glad to say IBM was there, MIT was there, Bell Labs were there. But it's just now starting to take off. There was a magic moment in 2012 when somebody said, hey, what if we use one of these game processors that has all these graphics processors on it? Would that help us? And since then, AI has been shooting up like this, which is really interesting because after 3 years, almost 3 years, 2.5 years of flying, I live in northern Vermont, I was working in Munich. It was great for frequent flyer miles, but it was not super great for jet lag and stuff like that. I decided I wanted a job closer to home. And so I got a job, I made up a job. MIT, we have a joint lab, IBM and MIT have a joint lab, where we're actually working on different areas, core AI technology, the science of AI, application, but also the ethics of AI. And this is a really interesting topic. You know, when you start thinking about AI, it's a really interesting topic because there have been people like Stephen Hawking who famously said it's either the best thing that's going to happen to the world or the worst thing. You decide. I mean, how do we know? It is really a pervasive technology. And I'm coming at it kind of as a newbie. It's fun and scary to actually go into a new field and go, you know, we have about 50 people on the MIT campus, and they literally are all half as old as I am and twice as smart. And it is really daunting. But it's just a great thing. That's one of the things about play. It allows you to dive in. So I've been kind of, it's back to the future for me. I'm back on campus trying to learn this stuff. And as I mentioned, the part about ethics and kind of AI for society, I now have a new career, which is thinking about playfulness and AI. And you may think, what? Well, it turns out that some of the bad stuff that AI can do, I mean, people are worried about, you know, robo-apocalypse, you know, and Skynet and stuff like that. I think we have to worry about that stuff in a long-term sense, but I'm much more worried about things like privacy and public understanding, and when you relegate decisions to a machine, whether it's driving a car or a train or a scalpel or anything like that, we really have to get people very interested. But how do you get people interested? My lesson has been, it's always about play. So we have to teach the tech to play, literally and figuratively. So literally, I think there are things that we can do to engage the public in AI and make it less mysterious. Because what you're interested in, you learn about, and you develop kind of an instinct, and you will not, let people make bad decisions on your behalf, like, steal all your Facebook friends. Like I have 5,000 Facebook friends. I'll tell you about that in a second. Bad choice. But the idea of actually being able to make tech that's relatable starts a conversation. But I think even further on, and let me tell you a little bit about that. This is a device. This is something I just created. It's, how do I describe this? Do you know what a theremin is? So theremin was a weird Russian dude. Oh, there might be weird Russian dudes here. He was an older gentleman. He was a classical musician, and he decided to make an instrument that you play with your hands. So I recently got challenged to do something on a weekend, so I created that thing called Veramin, like theremin with a V. And if you go look up Veramin and my name, you'll find a Medium article on it. It's a Git out there, so if you're a coder, you can go ahead and hack on it. But this is basically all in TensorJS. It's all in the browser. It works on the phone, sort of. It works on a tablet, sort of. But it works on a laptop really good. Well, sorry. But the idea is to be able, why did we build that? Well, in our lab, what we do is we always try to misbehave a little, and we steal some time to make AI that's kind of relatable. And so this thing I actually designed to do, so I have a little Tesla coil here. I'm not going to spark it up because the fine folks in the hotel decided that it might disrupt the, there's nobody in here who has any electronic equipment. And I will only tell them this afterwards, is I was doing this, trying to get ready to try to use it here last week, and I did knock out the electricity in the hotel, Airbnb that I was in. But I'm sure you saw what it was. So if you go look up Veramin and John Cohn, you'll get a link. It's https veramin.mybluemix.net. But it's really, so you can play it on your phone or whatever, but it's also designed to be a MIDI device that can control a Tesla coil, like this. So last night, when I realized we probably weren't going to be able to get the power to do it in here, I decided, this is kind of low res, but you get a sense of what it is. Very practical application of AI. It's actually very complicated, but it's an amazing, so when I do that, and when you start playing with it, and you will get addicted to it because it is a great party trick, it is then a very short conversation to get to AI and ethics. Really? Yes, believe it. And what's interesting about doing this, so I'm committed to putting play into AI kind of in that sort of peripheral way, but I think we need to put play into AI, because AI, what makes play? Play is spontaneous. It's unpredictable, right? Well, if the AI is actually emulating us algorithmically and is kind of predictable, like the news that you're always reading is just the news you think you want to read, and you don't get exposed to other stuff that might have a different view, if it is always making decisions on what you should buy and who you should marry, I would suggest you get a company to decide that for you. But if you don't put a sense of humor in there, I mean, how many people do you know that have, couples that were married, you said that must have been a joke, but it works, right? You need to be able to put that sort of spontaneity. And we're all, we're working, my lab is actually working on things like GANs, like general adversarial networks, which now AIs are starting to synthesize. And it won't be long, we just did a thing with debate. We have a thing called Debater, which is trying to debate. And we've won some of the debates, we've lost some of the debates against a human, but the main complaint we have is that we're not funny enough. So we actually have people who are working on being spontaneously funny. I think this is a really interesting area. How is humor or unpredictability, that the kind of things, or puns and those kind of things, how do they actually work in the way our mind works? Our minds are built to play. Now, so I would encourage you to get your hands dirty with AI. But I kind of want to branch back to what the group that's convening us, the IEEE Tech for Humanity. It's all about, so the group that's actually sponsoring us is about standards. And as we go forward, and we're making decisions about what things that we actually do that allows AI to be safe and trustworthy and fair, there's going to be standards. If we're going to allow AI to operate machinery like trucks, which is coming real close, mining equipment, surgical equipment, airplanes. Actually, airplanes have been run by AI for a long time. Anybody ever go on an airplane? You believe in AI? Okay, so the whole idea of how do we actually go through the world actually revolves around standards. When I asked you about how many of you knew about like Wi-Fi, well, I'll tell you, groups like the IEEE Standards Committee and our peers in organizations like the ACM are going to be setting standards for what do you do to make AI safe, fair, etc. going forward. And the only people who can do that are people like you who are informed, know what society really needs in AI. It's a wonderful time where society and tech are coming together, and rather than having tech shape society, if you think about how our cell phones have kind of warped maybe our world, we should let society kind of shape tech, and it's going to be through standards. And I'll give you an example, because the rules actually allow you to play. You would say that play and standards, maybe those are opposites. They are not. I mean, you could not play football or rugby like my wife used to play without rules. And this is an example of something that I did, another lesson, because play needs standards. And this is kind of my winding down now. What I want to say is, I really like working with groups of people, particularly kids, around building stuff. And there was a time, a while back, where I went to my wife and I said, beautiful hippie wife, what can I do to actually be, to do more? I was thinking about actually being a middle school teacher instead of an IBM and IEEE Fellow. She looked at me lovingly, she always does, and she goes, how the hell do I know? I'm cooking. That's the cosmos. So I went outside with my beer, and it was snowing like it always is in Vermont, and I said, I really did. I said, hey, Cosmos, what do you have for me? How can I be a better STEM guy? That's what I was. Nothing. But the next day, a woman called me from Hollywood, and she said, hey, you're funny looking. Really. And she said, do you want to be a scientist on reality TV? And I didn't hear the reality part, because I don't watch TV. And I was like, scientist. I was thinking of, I'd be like Mr. Rogers, and I'd say, boys and girls, this is how we make a small atom bomb, whatever. And long story, but I ended up getting stuck. I sent them a tape, they lost the tape, I sent them another tape. I had questions like, what animal would you be? I told them I'd be a squid, because I'm full of surprises, got my fingers in many things, and I'm chewy if improperly cooked. That's what got me the job. So I got a call, and I went there, and I got picked up, and I was there, kind of ready to shake their hands, and I was wearing my little blazer, and they put a bandana on my head and threw me in the back of the truck. And for 2 days, we had to answer all these questions. We had to build, take things apart, put things back together, build stuff up. And I was like, oh my God, what am I doing here? But we had to take a test, a psychological test. And one of them was, I dream of killing people. True or false? But there was other ones like aliens control my thoughts. True or false? It's not that easy, right? Because if they did, they would make you say no, right? What's going on? Well, anyway, and at the end, the psychologist, Dr. Quirk, he said, "Are you sure you want to be on reality TV?" And I said, "Oh man, I must be messed up." Well, anyway, just fast forward. I got a call. They said, "Hey, you're on the show. You got to come here for 2.5, almost 3 months, and you can't tell anybody." And this is what happened.
We're on the edge of a global catastrophic disaster. Human conflict.
So it was a lot like working at IBM, actually.
Biological warfare.
So it was an apocalyptic thing.
Without warning, the world as we know it can come to an end.
It's the near future. A viral outbreak decimates the world's population.
So basically, we weren't told what the scenario was, but there were 9 crazy people and me, and it was really weird. So for 59 days, we lived in this with no contact with the outside world. He's my Facebook friend. And it was all about rules. We were not allowed to. We had to make everything electricity. We had to purify our own lives, water, heat. We were all inside. You're a biologist. Having a marine biologist, if you're locked in a warehouse on the apocalypse, they're tasting you. And some of the stuff was really hard. Like that was pretty hard. He was really hard. We're all really good friends, and we've just come up on a major reunion. So we made all this stuff, but it was the standards, it was the rules that that actually made it. We were not allowed to drink alcohol that we didn't make ourselves. We weren't allowed to use electricity. We were only allowed to steal things that were not ours. That was crazy. But we had all sorts of crazy things. Like there was 3 hospitalizations. The one guy, my best friend in there, Joey, had just come out of 7 years of being in prison for making bad choices about drug trafficking. He was the best. He was great. He got a law, he got a history degree while he was in it, and he could make alcohol out of anything. But he got kidney stones, and he had to go into the hospital, and they did the whole TV thing. They took him to the hospital. They gave him, 2 minutes to put on the embarrassing thing with the flap in the back, and he just took all of the drugs he could find, put them in his backpack. He came back 4 days later, 13 pregnancy tests. So the whole thing was, I've been a vegetarian since 1977. We ended up eating a lot of dog food, cat food. If those zombies come, cat food, definitely. Don't dog food. Ate a lot of rats, pigeons, and rats. Rat was my first red meat since I became a vegetarian in '76 to annoy my parents. And rat was a good way to break that fast. It was great exercise. And it taught me a lot about living within the constraints and the standards. Again, the rules, which I really, this is where I learned in IEEE standards. Now, I'm winding down now. I just want to say there were lots of lessons from that whole thing. But I want to leave you with one thing. Because it was, at first I thought it was crazy. I almost walked out on the 3rd day, 3 o'clock in the morning, and the producer, Tom Beers, who made Deadliest Catch and Ice Road Truckers, he met me there. I mean, they were miking us all the time, so they knew what we were thinking. He said, "Trust me, it'll be fun." They had to drag me out. I was the dirtiest columnist. It was called The Colony. I wouldn't recommend the show. But I would recommend, if you ever get a chance to be on a crazy reality show, that is a really good career boost. Except, let me tell you this story. So my last lesson has to do with work. So play helps you when it's the hardest. Play helps you get through those transitions. Play helps you build a tribe. Play can help you get a job. It can be your portfolio. But the main thing is work. I am ethnically wired. Any other worriers up there? I was worried about that. So I really worry a lot, as I was telling you the story with my son. But, and that was really hard because you know, if you were going to be fearful and everything, this was in front of about 6 million people on the first go round and about 12 million people by the end of how many people. We've been dubbed into all sorts of different languages. I was on a bus in Nairobi a couple of years ago and somebody says, "Professor!" And I got this really macho voice in Spanish, which is really cool. But there was a lot of worry there. But one of the things on the day 3, so the biggest thing that we had to worry about was water. So you know how long you can go without food? Yeah, something like 40 days. Yeah, I'm on keto diet. I've been going without food since Christmas. But we can only eat air. But with water, you can go 3 days, and day 2 is not that fun. So water was always a big deal, and then hygiene. You know, water is used for a lot of things. You know, cooking and drinking, and but personal hygiene kind of came low on that list. And so the 3rd day, we all slept in the same, there was 2 beds. 10 people didn't meet each other in 2 different beds. Kind of, there's a lot of stories there too, we'll go into that. But we were dirty, we were gross. And it started raining. This is in southern LA, it was 90 degrees out. It started raining, and I walked outside just to get the stink off of me. You know, my 9 colleagues went outside to gather the water, and I was just feeling the rain come down, and I just felt so great. I turned around, and there was a guy with a $200,000 camera looking at me, and I'm like, "You would." He suggested that I pick up that plastic sheet, and so I did, and I didn't really think much of it so flash forward 59 days or 56 days later from that, I go back to work, try to explain to people I'm not supposed to talk about the show. I get summoned down to the headquarters of IBM. You know, the number 2 guy in IBM, our head of marketing, was very excited that an IBM Fellow and an IEEE Fellow had been on a science show. That sounds like good advertising. And I was there. We were like talking for about, it was supposed to be a 20-minute meeting, an hour and a half. And he was like, "I think this is going to be great." And I was thinking, you know, every 3rd word is beep. And, you know, I kind of said, "Well, it might be a little rough language." He said, "That's okay, as long as you kept your clothes on." I was like, I am so screwed. And I really thought that this thing had been a fun experience, but I thought I was going to be, you know, just laughed out of the company. And a couple of weeks later, we were all in LA. I saw it for the first time. Everyone else saw it. You know, you don't know what you're going to be made. And just spoiler alert, my wife was on the show for the last 2 weeks. But there we were, watching the credits roll up. And this is after I picked up the sheet. And I'm going, my kids are watching this. My parents are watching this. The number 2 guy in IBM is watching this. And I thought, I was so worried. And you know how, like, when you worry, you're like, "Oh, if I don't get this project done, I won't get that contract, I don't get that contract, I won't get the raise, I don't get the raise, I won't, that guy or girl won't marry me, and we won't have kids, and I'll end up in a ditch." You know, you play this stuff forward. I was just going, "Oh my God, you know, I am gonna have to go teach school." No, they would never let me teach school after that. What am I gonna do? And I went back to work, and I thought this was gonna be hell. Everybody, you know, people loved it. They thought it was fun. And then a couple of weeks later, I was at a big function, and I saw this number 2 guy in IBM trying to, you know, avoid eye contact. He came over to me and goes, "That was great, but you should get more sun." Kind of in conclusion, you know, play really can get you through these things. It can make you more creative. You know, if you find the time, misbehave a little bit, take the time to learn new stuff, make a few mistakes, embrace your mistakes, don't settle on them, but try stuff. Make some time. Do not allow other people to make your life for you. You know, have an intention that when you drift out of play, that you come back. There's a great George Bernard Shaw quote that says, "We don't stop playing because we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing." And take that to your life. Whatever you do, just get back in there. Whatever makes you a great lawyer, or a great toy maker, a great media person, a great engineer, don't ever let that die. Because society, nobody wants it to die, but things will get crowded out. So please do that. Go out there, have fun, make some fun mistakes, and blow some stuff up. So I just would say, There's actually discounted memberships. Find them back there. If you're a nerd like me, join them. They're over here. If you want to learn more about IEEE, if you want to learn more about Play, want to learn more about Tesla coils, we'll be around.